The wait is over. Norwich City have a new head coach. Philippe Clement is the man selected to lead the Canaries, hopefully, up the championship table. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. I'm Connor Southwell, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jonny McFarlane from the Rangers Review for an insight on the Canaries' new boss. Jonny, thank you very much for your time, first and foremost, and for giving up some of your Tuesday afternoon to speak about this. I guess probably the first question is what's your immediate reaction to the news of Philippe Clement's? I'm practicing my French accent, even though it's not French, but you speak it with a slightly French GCSE tongue. What's your reaction to the news of him becoming Norwich boss?
Yeah, I think it's a really smart move. If you look at Philippe Clement's career overall, he had an astonishing rise in Belgium. You're talking about a guy who's won a league in Belgium with two different clubs. Managed to bring a club that doesn't normally win things in that league to the title in Genk. And then he has gone to Club Brugge, which we know is a very well-run, very modern European side, and also got them over the line 2 years in a row. At that point, he's a very, very hot property. He moves to Monaco, has a very, very good first season, gets a reaction out of the players. I think they were in the Champions League. The second season, it tailed off somewhat. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think it particularly tailed off right at the end of the season for him, and it ended. What I would say is that over the course of that Monaco period in Ligue 1, I don't think he was a failure. He had players that went for huge money, players that he personally he improved. And then he arrives at Rangers not long after. The club is in transition. At that point, it's 7 points behind in the title race against Celtic. Nobody thinks there's a hope in hell's chance of them getting even near to Celtic. Philippe Clement really is tasked with rebuilding Rangers in a smart way, trying to get the best he can out of them. But there wasn't a sense that this title was on. However, one person that did say that the title was on was Philippe Clement from the moment he arrived. He said, absolutely feel like if you look at my record, if you look at what I've done, I can get a tune out of these players. I've watched the games. And he did. And the first 6 months at Rangers that he had were incredible. He's a big dominating figure. He's 6'3" or 6'4". He's a powerful presence. Very intelligent guy. He's got a master's degree, I think, in engineering. So you're talking about a guy who has got the intellectual capacity to quickly understand and learn about his environment. And certainly at Rangers, for the first 6 months with that squad, he performed miracles. Not only did he catch up on Celtic and won a League Cup, he went past Celtic. But I think ultimately he was held back by a failure to find a striker in the January transfer window. He signed a very good player in Fabio Silva on loan from Wolves. But Silva, who's now at Dortmund, I think he went for 30 or 40 million after a good period last season in the Spanish top flight. He wasn't a prolific goal scorer. He's a talented player who can play as a forward, left, forward, right, number 10, not a guy who's just going to be a cold-hearted killer. And as the season went into April, May, Rangers just ran out of steam. I don't blame that on Philippe Clement. I think that he was given a really, really difficult task, and no one was expecting him to do what he did. And I think overall, you'd have to say, if you were balanced and you were outside and you were looking in, it was still a successful season from the point of view of what he inherited. The difficulties come at the start of the next season when Philippe Clement is faced with ridiculous challenges. Mm-hmm. First of all, Rangers are rebuilding one of their stands. They are putting a cantilever in to allow a disabled section because the disabled facilities at Rangers have been dreadful. And that was a disaster. The steel didn't arrive on time. The stand didn't open. Rangers are then having to move from Ibrox for their home games to Hampden Park, which is a very different environment. It's a bowl. So while Ibrox is 52,000 people on top of you and extraordinarily intimidating, Hampden is very, very different. It's a bowl. The noise comes up and out. And Rangers fans are just not happy about being at Hampden. So immediately he goes into a qualifier against Bayern Munich, Bayern Munich, against Dynamo Kiev. Doesn't get through. There's a very, very dubious red card in the game at Hampden that stops Rangers, I think, from comfortably winning the second leg. And from then, he's on the back foot. The club are all over the place with a stand issue, not being in their home ground. Then the CEO leaves for the Middle East, Saudi. Then the chairman, for health reasons, has to step down. And the club starts to implode. Now, they're comfortably second in the league. I mean, it's so far away from the Russell Martin disaster. It's a lot better than that. You know, he's doing a lot better. It's not Russell Martin levels, but it wasn't what Rangers would expect. But at the same time, Philippe Clement did not have a lot of money to play with. And I think there's a sense amongst, if you talk to Rangers fans or Rangers journalists who covered the club, they would say that Philippe Clement was put in an impossible situation, an impossible job. There's no manager in Europe that would have won the league with the situation that Rangers were in last year. So I look at the Championship, I look at his style of football, and I look at the club, Norwich, and the size of the club, and it's a one-club town. You know, I think it's perfect for Philippe Clement.
It's interesting what you say there, because what I take away, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of saying good coach, tough circumstances in terms of that Rangers spell. Because I think a lot of Norwich fans have looked at that, and it's a bit, whenever a manager gets sacked from a job, what's gone wrong? Why did it go wrong? But that seems to be kind of the picture that you've painted, that maybe there's a lot of mitigation around Philippe Clement about why that spell at Ibrox didn't quite go as planned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure that he'll say that if he's asked about it come the press conference. It's undeniable that the forces that were going on working against him on the football pitch were tremendous. Now, that's not to say he didn't have the odd bad result. I mean, the result that really did him, Rangers were knocked out of the Scottish Cup last season by Queen's Park, who are a championship club. But the game was a freak game. Rangers had 30 shots on goal. Queen's Park had one. They scored it. Rangers missed a penalty in the 93rd minute at home. It was the Alamo for the whole game. You know, it was one of those weird games where everything goes against you. But the other thing about Philippe Clement, and this is why I think the Championship is a better level than the Scottish Premiership. There's no doubt about that. There's more good teams. I think Rangers and Celtic would be amongst the best teams in the Championship, if I'm being honest. I think if they came at the Championship, they'd probably win it. But if you're talking, or they'd be very close. But if you're talking about the depth of quality throughout the Championship, far exceeds anything in the Scottish Premiership. And Philippe Clement's big issue from a tactical point of view is, I would describe him as not a specialist in breaking down a low block. What he is very good at is managing games against equal or better opposition, where you're going up against a team who's also trying to win. What happens if you're Rangers against Kilmarnock? Kilmarnock will sit behind the ball. They'll have a back five. They'll have a back four that's narrow. And then they'll have the one striker run about, hopefully, that can run onto something when there's a ball over the top. But Rangers in a high block, just pummeling, knocking at that door. I don't think that's really Philippe Clement's game. And I think if you look at the performances in Europe under Clement's time, they're fantastic. I mean, Philippe Clement got to the quarterfinal of the Europa League last season. Okay, he wasn't there for the game against Fenerbahce and the game against Bilbao, where Rangers went out. But he built that squad. They were playing in a very similar style to the way he played. And throughout his time, the European record was very, very good. And Rangers were always a massive threat on the counter-attack. He's not a manager that puts a lot of premium on possession, really. He's very much a pragmatist. He's very, very good at setting teams up as transitional. And he likes pacey wingers who can get in behind. He likes a bustling centre forward. And you know, one of the big criticisms was at Rangers, perhaps a better style is more possession orientated because you eventually wear a team out Was Philippe Clement's style a little bit too much basketball? And for me, I think there was an element of, while Clement wasn't given the tools in the transfer market, I'm not sure if the style of Scottish football, which is very much about dominating and beating the low block, is what he's good at. And I think that'll show in the Championship. But if we're talking about substitutions, if we're talking about going up against a team that you know have better players, I think that's really his wheelhouse. So looking at where you are in the league at the moment, Norwich, I think he'll be in a good place to come in and galvanise. And the other thing is, Connor, he's a leader of men. He's a guy, he's a focal point, and he'll have learned. He's a smart guy, as I've said. He'll have learned from his time at Rangers, and that was a bruising experience. He'll never go through the same traumas at Norwich, because Norwich has a more stable culture than Rangers did at that time. Even if things are going slightly wrong at Norwich, it's more stable than what Rangers were at that moment, with a CEO leaving, with a chairman leaving, with the transfer budget slashed in half what he was told they would be. So I think he'll come in, and I think fans will say, they'll use that cliche of, wow, he spoke well in the presser, because he does speak really well. And I think he's a guy who'll walk into that training round and he'll get everybody up, and people will go, right, this guy's a leader. This guy's a guy to get behind. He knows what he's talking about. He's been at big clubs in Monaco and Rangers, and he's won big titles in a really good league in Belgium.
And that was something I was going to ask you. And just to kind of follow on, you mentioned the word leadership, presence, you said earlier. That clearly is what Norwich City are in need of right now. They're 4 points adrift and 23rd in the Championship, which isn't the place they'd want to be. But I think even from that first club interview and the fans seeing him, I think there is that immediate kind of respect and I don't know if aura is the right word, but it's the word I'm kind of leaning to now. That sense that he's going to be able to walk in and command the dressing room pretty quickly, which for where Norwich are is going to be hugely important to get that sort of level of instant results that he's going to need to get. And like you say, having worked at Rangers and Bruges and Monaco and other big clubs and competing for titles, he will already have that mentality of needing to go in and win very quickly, as opposed to being one of these coaches that needs time to build something. That seems to be the case.
Yeah, and I think he's a pragmatist. And I remember when he came in to Rangers, things weren't working. Michael Beale had just been sacked. There'd been a number of defeats throughout the course of that season, which is why Beale was obviously showing the door. And he came in and he was very much like, there's a story here. And you'll hear this from him. He talks about this. There's a story that he tells the players. And what he's basically talking about, because English isn't his first language, is that he has a plan over a period of time. It's not a story you can tell in one day. It's a story that's going to take place over a number of weeks. And he talked about how he would, first of all, apply little things, and slowly as time went on, would add more and more and more to the story. And you saw that. You saw that in action. Rangers had some small changes in the first game. They were very robust, very well drilled under him. And then as time went on, you just started to see them coming out their shell more, coming into their own more, and performing, I think, as Clement wanted them to perform. I genuinely think he was the right guy at the wrong time for Rangers. I felt this for quite a long time. He was under quite a lot of criticism towards the end, because obviously it fell apart at the end, and he was sacked. But to me, he just wasn't given the opportunity to perform at the level that you would expect any manager to get to as a Rangers manager. You couldn't do that with the tools that he was given. I think the other thing that's worth saying, I don't know how much of the background at Norwich would be about player development. But
huge. Yeah, huge.
Clement's obviously come from a background with Bruges, whereby that was a key part of the business model of the club, the transfer model, the player trading model. And he really was the first Rangers manager that it felt like took that seriously, took the idea of bringing in young, talented players from leagues that perhaps were less well known, markets that were less well known, and bringing them to Rangers and getting the best out of them. And that's not just Philippe Clement; that's in tandem with the director of transfers at Rangers, the director of recruitment, a guy called Niels Koppen, who's also a Belgian that Clement brought in. They didn't actually know each other very well. I just think he was the best person for the job. It wasn't a kind of connection there. But together they brought in a guy called Hamza Igaman, who is tearing up League One right now, tearing it up. And Igaman came in for, I think, about 1.5 million, something in the region of 1.5 to 2.5 million from a club in Morocco. And he, obviously unheard of, 21-year-old when he arrived, and he disappeared. Sustained an injury, I think, before he arrived. So he came in from this club, AS Far, and a lot of people in the Scottish media were very critical of, like, why are you spending money? You don't have a striker on this guy. And Clement just very subtly said something in one of his pressers. He said, oh, he's coming back and he's showing some very interesting things in training. And then we all thought, I wonder what that means. And then, you know, when he came into the team, you really saw what he meant. This is a guy who's a complete maverick, incredible skills, able to beat a man in seconds, just leave him completely dead, explosive, good finisher, and just a young kid, right? But a rough diamond, I want to stress. He's gone for 11 million there in the summer. I think at his new team so far, Lille, he is, I think he's on 6 or 7 goals and really, really performing very, very well in Ligue 1. If you look at the Ligue 1 X account, you'll see that he's consistently compared to the original Brazilian Ronaldo, because he's a sort of, he's a very powerful guy, and he runs in a similar way. So Clement was part of the team that unearthed him. He unearthed them. Was also involved in the signing of a guy called Hefty, who's a left back for 500 grand from a Cypriot club, who was transferred out in the summer there for £6 million back to Brazil. He also brought in a guy called Mo Diamande from Denmark, who's been really good for Rangers at times, especially in big games. He's a very good player. Sometimes the hustle bustle of Scottish football doesn't suit him, but overall, I think a right good find, and someone that Clement developed as well. So I think he's got a track record of really understanding what clubs need to do in the modern market if they're going to be player trading clubs, and getting quality levels of performance out of those players. He's not going to be a guy that's going to complain about being part of a model where players are sold on. That's what he's used to. He had that at Rangers. He had that at Monaco. He had that at Bruges. He knows that's the thing. So you're not going to get a guy who's going to be rallying against a sporting director telling him, well, you know, we're a selling club. This is how we operate. But I think he's got a solid background in taking these guys in and then selling them on for a profit, and certainly being part of that ideology. So I think he'll have been talking about that certainly in his interview, and I'm sure the people who are making the decisions at Norwich will have looked at the evidence and felt like it was backed up, and I would agree with that.
Final couple, Jonny. I mean, in terms of the fan base, we know how big Rangers is as a football club. How was he in terms of his interactions with them and his want to connect with them? I've seen kind of already that he's on social media, which feels quite rare for coaches in this day and age still.
I don't think he's doing it himself, though. I think he's got a team that does it for him.
I think that's probably fair, yeah. But what was that like in terms of that want to connect with the Rangers supporters during his time at the club?
Yeah, I think he was always talking about synergy. He was always talking about bringing the fans on side and using the power of the fans. And there was no doubt that Rangers felt that at time during his reign. Rangers is an unforgiving club. It's an unusual club. It's, I think, one of the most challenging clubs in all of Europe to manage, because of the level of expectation and the level of finance don't always go together. I also think there's idiosyncrasies to the Scottish League, the challenge of Celtic, and then the level of quality of the rest of the teams, although Hearts are massively improving since Tony Bloom got involved, as you can imagine with the analytics. And I think you saw when Rangers won the League Cup final, he was heavily involved in the celebrations. There's a club museum that's right next to the stadium at Rangers. There's a balcony, and they were showing the cup there, and there was a lot of sort of viral moments with Philippe, you know, winding the crowd up and getting the crowd going, and then like flashing the trophy and things like that. And What I would say though is, it's also extraordinarily difficult when you're a Rangers manager and things aren't going well, because they'll turn on you. They turn on you quickly. You know, it's a club that only success matters. Only success is accepted. That said, I think it's telling that recent Rangers managers that haven't been successful have left the club. I mean, I wouldn't even want to give you an adjective for how Russell Martin is considered. I would advise him not to head to Govan anytime soon on a match day. He is not well liked. If you look at Michael Beale, who had enormous success with the club as a coach under Steven Gerrard, was incredibly well regarded, and he managed to kind of set fire to all that during his time. Actually, quite like Michael Beale as both a guy and a coach, and think he was a bit unlucky in some ways. He's a young manager who made mistakes, but if I'm assessing the general mood, I would say that Michael Beale is kind of not well liked now either. Certainly not to the scale of Russell Martin. I know he's a Norwich legend, so I might have to watch what I'm saying, but I can't stress to you enough how much of a disaster Russell Martin's period at Rangers was. That animosity, that dislike is not the same with Philippe Clement. People understand that he was dealt a very, very poor hand. And I think most people, and most people certainly in the media, recognise that, well, Philippe wasn't perfect and had his failings. He's a good manager and a good football operator who wasn't given the full opportunity to succeed. And I think that was quite bruising for Philippe personally. I understand, you know, he really did take to Rangers and take to the city and enjoyed it and wanted to succeed. But I think even he knew in the end that he'd come in a period where there was kind of no coming back from it. That, you know, everyone who was involved in that period was tarred by it. The defeat by Queen's Park was just kind of the last straw, I think, ultimately. And you just don't get time. I still think, for example, if Philippe had been left in charge and had been given the kind of funds that have been spent this summer by this new regime at Rangers, because the ownership's changed, I think they've spent in the region of £35 million, which I know in the Championship's not a huge amount of money, but for Scottish football, it's a lot of money. I think Rangers would be in a far better position than they are right now.
Just final one then. I mean, given everything that you said and clearly how highly you rate him, are you a little bit surprised that it's Norwich? Obviously sacked as Rangers boss in February. I'm sure he's had all kinds of interest from all over the place, but 23rd in the Championship, as I said, 4 points adrift. It is, even if it is just initially, it's initially going to be about getting a club out of danger, or the fact that he's taken this on and viewed this as a challenge worth kind of taking on at this stage of his career. Is that in many ways indicative of his character?
Yeah, absolutely. I think listen, he's 51. I think he'll always have wanted the opportunity to get down to England. Everyone in world football wants to get to England. You know, if you want to enrich yourself, you go to Saudi. If you want to challenge yourself in the best football environment, you go to England. And Norwich, I think, is actually a brilliant job. It's one of those jobs that if you're in Football Manager, you go and go, well, that's one I take right now, because what a challenge it is, and massively underperforming. You can't go lower than you are at the moment. You look at the club, the stadium, the city, the environment, it's all there to get shooting back up that league. So he'll look at this and think, I've won a watch here. I have got in the door at one of the top 5 or 6 Championship clubs, that if I get them just even on an even keel, I should be in the playoffs year in, year out. So year one, it'll be stabilise. You know, where you are at the moment, that's realistic, I think. You're going to have a bit of a turnover in that squad, potentially. But he'll look at it as, I've got a great opportunity to get to the promised land of the English Premier League. And that's where he'll see himself. And I know he sees himself as an elite operator. And he'll have the chance to prove it. But I think Norwich is a great move for him, and a great move for Norwich City and the fans, because there's alignment between, in my view, what he's good at and what Norwich need, and what his football is, and what the Championship requires. And sometimes in football, and increasingly in football, I think that's becoming more and more important. You know, like back in 10, 15 years ago, clubs used to go from one style of manager to another and wildly veer left and right and all over the place. I think now it's more about the model and the club and the organisation and the structure and how people fit into the structure. Again, without having to go back to the name that be not mentioned, Lord Voldemort, Russell Martin, he just wasn't a good fit in any way for Rangers Football Club. It's just not an environment that would ever fit Russell Martin's personality or coaching style. Whereas I look at Philippe Clement and think he actually did fit Rangers much better. And I think looking at where Norwich are right now, I think he'll fit that much better. I think he'll go in, the chest will be puffed up. It'll be, right, guys, let's believe in this again. Let's get back to the rightful place of Norwich, which is as a Premier League team. That's what he'll say. And that's what he'll believe. And I would not put any money against him doing that in the next 2 or 3 years if he gets the proper financial backing from the club and he gets a bit of time and patience to adapt to the league. But he's a smart cookie, and he will quickly learn about the Championship and what's needed. The one slight concern, if I can throw in a concern, I think set pieces were a problem for Rangers under Philippe Clement. I actually asked him a question about it at one point in the presser about, you know, all the big elite clubs now in Europe seem to be hiring specialist set piece coaches. Rangers literally yesterday announced that they'd hired a guy from Lincoln City in League One. A lot of people in Scotland saying, where's this come from? The fact is, Lincoln City scored 30 goals from set pieces last year. They're the top performer in pretty much in the whole of Europe at a decent professional level and above. Philippe Clement, he's a big, I've talked to you before, he's 6'3", 6'4". He was a central defender. He was a central defender and defensive midfielder in his career. He could play in either positions. And he loved nothing more than to get on the end of a set piece himself. So he really, really liked to take the set pieces. And my point of view was, don't you have enough to do? His point of view was, yeah, but I want control of that because I really love doing it. And it's something that I understand intrinsically, having been a player. And you've got to remember, Philippe Clement, he was at the top level as a player as well, Belgian international. But I disagreed with that, and I think that the numbers were poor under Philippe Clement in terms of set pieces. So I hope he's learned from that, because I think that's one area that he definitely could bring in a staff member, or if he's got a staff member that's really good at that. I think
Norwich do have a set piece coach, so that's going to be an interesting dynamic.
That'll bring a lot, because he's got so many strengths in other areas. I just think there's another element at Rangers as well, which I think this whole strand of thought ties into, which is I think he kind of got a bit burnt out towards the end at Rangers because he was doing so much. I mean, he was doing what a traditional manager what that role was. And he was getting pulled into all the kind of politics of the boardroom and behind the scenes stuff at the club because there was literally no one there to answer questions. So I think he just got ground down a bit towards the end. And but do you know what? It's one of those ones where you go, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a tendency in football to be like, oh, he failed at Rangers, why will he succeed at Norwich? Well, actually, you can be a lot better as a manager having failed at a big European club where there's a lot of pressure and you're playing Europa League football every season, going up against high-level opposition tactically. I'm sure he will have improved as a low block coach because he's been coaching against that for 2 years. So, I can't stress enough. Having seen some of the names that were linked, I won't mention any more names again. I think this is a right good one.
Jonny, fantastic insight. Thank you very much. I mean, finally, before we let you go, because I've kept you for enough of your time, just tell us about the Rangers Review and the brilliant work you do over there and where people can find you. Yeah,
so the Rangers Review is basically a pink un for Rangers. That's the best way to describe it to Norwich guys. So if you're a Rangers fan as well as a Norwich fan, get on there. We've got a deal at the moment. It's £12 for a year's coverage. It's all the tactical analysis, in-depth features, breaking news, everything you can imagine about the club in one place. High quality, athletic style rather than the sort of traditional tabloid newspaper style, thoughtful, longer pieces rather than like lots of short pieces, and taking the depth of coverage of the club into a kind of new level. So if you like Rangers, if you like what I've had to say, get onto the Rangers Review.
Yeah, definitely do that, because they do some brilliant work. I can definitely vouch for that. Jonny, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for watching and for listening. Another era begins at Norwich City. Let's see what Philippe Clement has in store for the Canaries. See you soon.
Thanks, Connor.